want. Take a look.
What is this? Death Note? Aponia, or as I like to call Mummy Jesus, is someone that's somewhat of a fearsome figure to most. Like, what was your first impression of her? To me, she looks like someone you should stay away from. She's the kind of person who is probably up to something, and I'm not sure I should stick around to find out. I'm sorry if she's trying to appear friendly, but she's doing a bad job at it. Like, look at her eyes. This is the look of someone who has seen things, and you can't tell what it is because she always speaks in a suspiciously soft tone. This is also just about what many in the Moth thinks of Aponia, but first impression do change, and after unlocking all her story, I can confidently say that despite Aponia being a fearsome figure to most, she might be ironically the most important figure that helped keep those very people together in their most tiring times. Like say after losing a horrific amount of their friends in an operation that went horribly wrong. Today is the story of a nun who went to extreme lengths to keep those around her alive and well, often at her own expense. Ascetic is the chosen word used to describe Alicia. Wait. It's a reference to a religious practice that is most common in Hinduism and Buddhism, though it can also be found elsewhere in Christianity, which seems to be what Aponia's nun outfit is based on, albeit let's say, heavily stylized. Asceticism, in this case, is likely in reference to Aponia mostly shedding herself away in the deep end. For what reason, you may ask? Well, you may have heard about a place called Sundown Alley a couple times while you're playing through Elysian Realm. A first-hand account states that Aponia used to run a shelter there for those in need, which happens to be the people infected with the Honkai disease. How she got away with this without getting infected herself is beyond me, but something happened that caused a zombie outbreak originating from her shelter, which alerted the authorities, the Moth, who swiftly put her under arrest. Because why would a random person gather all the Honkai infected individuals in the same place when that's just a recipe for disaster? But from Aponia's reaction to the event, she probably just didn't know any better. Now in true Moth fashion, whenever someone is taken in as a criminal, they are sent to the surgery room where Mobius would be able to go to town. Aponia would win the lottery by emerging from the surgery with cool perks that she would use to a great effect. She can do many things like making you feel better just because she said so, or speeding up your recovery through an effect similar to how in our world there are research that suggests beliefs and positive thinking stimulate our own defenses and healing systems against diseases and illness. Other examples I've given all have one thing in common, and that is it's related to the manipulation of the mind, which is the essence of Aponia's power at its most basic level. She calls it discipline. I discipline you to not rage when you lose that 50-50. And I discipline you to like, share and subscribe to this channel. But most importantly, she can literally see the strings of fate, the ultimate outcome of someone's life. In previous era's term, it means a painful and premature death. This was what Aponia repeatedly attempted and failed to change even with all her mind manipulation power. Sure, she can make them feel or do better at something, but it still wouldn't change the outcome she wanted them to avoid. And that is the sin that Aponia mentions so often. As her failures increase, so does the extremity of her methods. She once foresaw that a person would die in the battlefield, so to prevent that, she threw that person into the deep end, which is basically Fire Moth fancy jail. And as always, the fate that she saw got the best of the person after a riot broke out down there and killed the person anyway. After so many borderline demoralizing failures, Aponia decided to just screw it and locked herself in the deep end to atone for her sins. Now she would probably stay there forever if not for Kevin dragging her out of it, because you can't have a big asset just sitting there while all your civilization is reduced to 3 fucking cities. Revert to who you once were. You know, it's a fairly unconventional way of saying stop mulling over it and just get a move on already. Once Aponia got out of there, she quickly got to work, which I reckon she would after seeing the absolute state of despair in the staffs after the tragedy of binding. She gave those people a very simple discipline to never give up hope against the Honkai, and that would be it, right? Morale problem solved. May I ask you why these guys who got ahead and murdered Rin have your discipline on them? You see, the discipline realizes the desire of the receiver. In what way? I wish I knew. It's fair to say that Aponia was responsible for Rin dying to an angry mob because they might not have went bonkers in the first place if not for the discipline they were given. At least Kelpas thought so, as he heavily contemplated killing her on the spot. But was this an outcome Aponia deliberately instigated? I don't think so. Because unlike others who are motivated by a loss of something, often to the Honkai, Aponia only really seemed to care about just helping people in need. It's why you don't see much of a strong opinion about Honkai coming out of her compared to the others, because she just wants to continue to do what she's doing, just that now it's in a different environment. A good example is Grisio. Basically, you are not to do anything funny to her if you want to avoid Mommy Aponia personally minimizing the air you breathe. She didn't just decide to take care of Grisio with some ulterior motive in mind. She saw a child that needs protection and she stepped up, which is something that I can respect. Even when it's dawning on her that her era's end is inevitable, she's still doing what she can to ease the pain of those around her. She would remove any regrets or failure from a dying person's mind so he or she would believe that they lived a perfect life free of regrets. Aponia in Greek is the absence of pain, but this is probably not aimed towards Aponia herself, as she more or less bears the sins of those around her so they can feel a little bit better. She was instrumental in keeping many in check, like most of the flame chasers who actually had received some form of her discipline before, because oftentimes they really do need some moderation. Like restraining Kelpas from committing too many war crimes sometimes. Remember the transformation Hua went through to become a mantis? Yeah, Aponia also helped in that.
どうしたの? 話したくないの? 自分を殺すと言い放った相手に対して私はかなり自制できている方だと思うわよ。
Emotional, damn it!
Some of her methods can be quite extreme and give many people a bad taste, like copying the 8th Herrscher personality, turning a child into another Alicia, or wiping the staff's mind clean of Firemoth intel. All these sound equally insane, but it's hard to see any of them filled with any ill intent. While her action may be socially unacceptable to most around her, there are still people who have understood the reason behind these actions. Those like Alicia and Eden, who she sometimes go to let out how frustrated she was at what seems like a futile struggle. To end her story, here Aponia declared that she would become a world unto oneself. In English, it means merging herself with the Elysian realm, using her power to remember a certain person in their entirety. At this point, everyone and their cat knows that it's Alicia, but I feel like we don't have the full picture quite yet, and I'm expecting chapter 29 to shed light on it. And that is how Aponia held up the Moth through their darkest hours, oftentimes at her own expense. Now let me know your opinions on Aponia, especially after finishing her story. This has been it for today's episode. Check out other videos in this series from this playlist here, and thank you for watching. And I say good friends because it's completely normal to enjoy the moonlight together with your friend laying on their